Howdy, students, Humanities 2, Shasta College. It's me, your humble narrator, Rex Haas Thompson, professor of Humanities. And this class is doing a survey of humanities from essentially early modern times, 1500s or so to the present. We're got a long ways to go. We're into the 1700s now. It's a great period, a rich time for all sorts of things are happening. People's lives are changing. The world is changing. The revolution in America is starting to rumble and be a reality. Europe is in a post-Renaissance period of enlightenment when it comes to philosophy, religion, the arts, everything that involves a quality of life. I want to continue. We're going to be on music for a while, probably all through next week also. I'm going to try to take this all the way up until current times. If I could pull it off, we'll see. Anyway, music is that important. Maybe it's important to you also. Maybe you're not aware how important it is. Maybe it's just the background when you're doing your homework or watching, doing something else. It's always in the background. Maybe it's never on. I don't know. It's important, just like everything else. We're trying to inform you guys in this class: the art, the painters, the writers, the Shakespearean, the plumbing system. And Florence, India, all of a sudden we have plumbing, waters, the sewage being taken out to the ocean. But at least we're not living on top of it. And so disease and sickness is abating because that's what made everybody sick in the early days. Getting living on top of your waste is not healthy, especially if you live in a big city and you're living on top of 2 million other people's waste too. Not good, not a good thing. Anyway, so what's happening now? I hope you guys watched the little documentary that we started a couple days ago, The Origins of Music, Part 1. I'm going to assign you to look at Part 2. I'll put the link up on Canvas. Also, I see that you guys started the conversation on how does music affect you? What's your relationship with music? So please, if you haven't piped into that, keep piping in. Anyway, the more you pipe in, the better it is for everybody. It keeps the conversation moving. And if you just pipe in one brief thing, it doesn't help the conversation. So express yourself. We're not in a classroom right now, so you have no really need to be shy about speaking up. Let your fingertips do the walking on your keyboard. I'm sure you're all texting like crazy, TikToking and all of this stuff. So go to crazy in these discussions. That's cool. Be a discussion leader. Say something interesting and provocative that others can reply to. Spark a intelligent discussion about music, and see where it takes you. See how it enriches your life. Were you raised in a musical family? Does anybody play music? Do you play an instrument? Did your father, was he musical? Your mom? Did they instill the love of music in you? That's usually a story that's uh, relevant, and it helps our development as human beings if we have a background like that, and we're not just raised in a vacuum where we have to bring all this stuff into our lives to enrich our lives ourselves. My background is not that wonderful. My mother loved music. She was a good singer. At one time, in the late 1940s, she auditioned for a swing band that was on tour on the West Coast, but she was underage. She was only 17, and she passed the audition. She's that good, and she's a very attractive woman. They wanted to take her on a tour from Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, on down the road to LA. And her very tough immigrant Greek father said, absolutely not, over my dead body. And so she was not allowed to go. But it could have changed my mom's life. I wish she um, had been old enough to make her own legal decisions, because she always sang around the house, always had music on of the day that she grew up in, which was big band swing music, but she liked, the 50s music, but she loved people like Rosemary Clooney and Ella Fitzgerald. She loved those jazz singers, and but she loved early rock and roll, Elvis Presley and the Everly Brothers. When that throw with the Beatles, too scruffy. Rolling Stones, no way. Too scruffy looking. But hadn't been in Reading a long time. My mom was living here, and I'd lived out of town for many, many years. So I came back to visit, and I looked at her stereo, and she had two records that surprised me. She had an Elton John album. I go, Mom, what is this? You're listening to Elton John? Yeah. Oh, I love Elton John. I love Elton John. And Neil Diamond she loved. And I was kind of surprised that she was listening to contemporary. This would be in the 70s, folks, maybe the 80s. She was always up to date and interested in what was going on. If she liked something, she liked it. And my dad wasn't really like that. My dad liked music. He played the saxophone in high school, but he didn't instill us in any musical talent, that's for sure. I would say he was definitely a product of his generation. They listened to Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett and the like, which are great. They're great, folks. But they weren't my generation. They're probably not your generation. But you got to learn to love music throughout all the generations. That's the beauty of the humanities class. You learn to love what went before us, and how contemporary music is just an extension of that. My dad always had a love for jazz, and he bought jazz records. Not so much, and I'll talk about jazz later. You don't need to know about it yet, but I wouldn't say he was a Charlie Bird or Coltrane or Miles Davis fan. It was mostly kind of white man's jazz, like Chet Baker, who's great, Boots Randolph, who was a saxophone player, and a kind of contemporary very white West Coast, Dave Brubeck, wonderful jazz musician, and that's kind of the music he followed up until he died, actually. Interestingly enough, and I'm just going to give you the suffice out there, folks, never marry anybody who doesn't like music. I'm just saying it right now. If you love music, it's not going to work. Zero going to work. He ended up marrying a woman who didn't like music. Can you imagine not liking music? And so he rarely had it on in his house. The thing he loved to listen to, she took it away from him. That's a power trip, isn't it? This happens a lot, though. Happens a lot. Anyway, if your spouse doesn't share your love of what you love, it's going to be a tough haul. Long road to haul. Anyway, so hopefully you guys find somebody who you have the same taste in music and movies and literature and painting and whatever else you guys do for interest and fun. Anyway, so when the Beatles came on TV, of course, everybody in my generation immediately wanted to grow your hair long. You wanted to get some cool Beatle boots, and you wanted to get a guitar. Guitar sales in this country went up 1,000-fold, and I was no different. I started taking guitar lessons. I was about 13. I had a teacher who never really taught me much. He liked to play, and so mostly I sat in the room and watched him play. I didn't quite understand what he was doing, and that's not good. I wasn't a natural player. By the time I moved out and I was living in LA and the whole punk rock thing was happening in the late 70s, I bought an electric guitar, Fender Telecaster for $200. My intention was to learn a couple of 5 chords and start a punk band. And but I was living with a woman at the time that kind of mocked all that. Yes, that's right. I too lived with a woman who mocked music. Although she listened to a lot of really good music. Just didn't believe in my musical talents. Anyway, my younger brother moved to LA. We got him a guitar, and we would go into my bedroom in East LA and crank it up until I almost went deaf. I did lose my hearing in my left ear. We advertised for a drummer and a bass player. Never happened. Well, then I kind of put the guitar away until I moved out. And I was old, folks. I was like in my late 30s, living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I went out there because, well, I like the art scene out there. And I was a playwright, and I was writing some plays for this theater and riding horses and kind of living out a cowboy fantasy. And I was directing a play that I'd written. These people who I had cast in the play. One of them said something about guitars. I said, I have a guitar. Well, what kind of guitar do you have? I told him. He said, well, we should get together and jam. I go, oh, no. But he's the guy that started it for me to get it back out. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be ashamed of it. And what I did, and this is what I still do. If you look around my house, I'm surrounded by guitars. I've got 8 or 9 guitars in here right now, and I've got more in storage unit. And I have them all out, all hooked in the amplifiers, that are ready to go when I need to go. He's the one that instilled that into me. He said, you should have your guitar within arm's reach. And so if you got to grab it, you grab it. And so now, folks, usually when I'm watching movies, I've got a guitar in my hand. It's a habit, and I think everybody needs to play an instrument. I'm not saying I'm any good, but I could put some songs together. And so later on, that person and I formed a punk rock band called Scary Elvis. I wrote most of the songs and sang. Only reason why I sang, because no one else wanted to sing. And I'm not a singer, folks. But as you know, in punk, you don't really need to be a singer. But we cranked it out. We were together for about 3 or 4 years and played a lot of live gigs. We recorded a bunch, and I'm still doing this. I'm still writing stuff and performing if I can. It's not easy. I have I would call it not a punk band, but more of a casual garage band right now. We've only played out a couple times, but since the COVID hit, we haven't played out at all. A drummer and a bass player and me on guitar. The songs that I've written, rocking songs, but we can't play right now, so not much is happening. That's frustrating. So that's my musical background, and my love of music started way before the Beatles. I loved Elvis and Ricky Nelson and the Everly Brothers. It's long before your times, folks. And I like smooth singers too. Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, all those guys. They were my mom's and dad's generation, and I thought they were great. Kind of corny, yeah. They're always singing as they drink a cocktail and smoke cigarettes. Who does that? Anyway, they did. Anyway, so that's a little bit of my background on that. Still believe in the power of 3 chords. So I'm going to sign a couple of documentaries for you to watch, actually several of them. But you got the weekend, and there's no papers due. Maybe there's a paper due now, but I'm not assigning a paper until next week, so don't worry about this week. Besides the discussion, that's all we're doing. But I'm going to sign you part 2 of the start of the documentary. I hope you're watching it. I sent the link to post on Canvas last week, or I should say on Tuesday. And watch part 2. There's 6 parts. Hopefully we can get through all 6 of them. They're all a little under an hour. From the BBC, the guy tackles music in a pretty thorough way. Gives you a heads up on what is a musical note? What does our ear hear? And that's pretty basic and fundamental, but if you want to know why things are, you have to discover why they are. Anyway, and that's what we're doing in this class. Why was the painters I assigned, why did they matter? Well, hopefully he discovered something when he wrote those papers about Rembrandt or the Dutch painters Vermeer. Hopefully he discovered something about not just them, but our culture and how what they did 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago affects our culture hundreds of years later. That's pretty phenomenal. And so then I'm going to assign you two documentaries to watch. Uh, Two guys that changed the face of music, classical music now. We're not getting into the more contemporary stuff that maybe you've heard of. Hopefully, you've heard of these guys. Mozart is one, considered a boy genius. They don't know how he got his musical knowledge. They literally don't. He was writing concertos when he was like 6 years old. Um, really, that is a gift that only comes from another source. We don't know where it comes from. Um, the other one was a little bit later, but definitely in the same category is Beethoven. Maybe you've heard of him. I bet you've heard their music in movies or commercials on TV or somewhere along the line. Believe me, you've heard their music. So there's two documentaries that are both really good. The Beethoven one is 3 parts. Just watch part one if you can. And Mozart it's all there. I found one that's pretty interesting where they have actors playing the parts and stuff. He was they're both special phenomenon people who changed their culture at the time, the world's culture. Can you imagine? Their music spread out into the world. And this is long before recordings, folks. There was no CDs or downloading MP3s, nothing. You had to hear it for reals in real time. But sheet music was a thing. It was printed and it was sent on to the next city. And that orchestra that a lot of big cities in Italy, France, Vienna had their own orchestras, and they would play the new piece by Beethoven or Mozart, and that's how the word got out on the music. And people were astounded what they're hearing. And these guys wrote the notes down. They all know how to read music, folks. They know how to put notes on them on a tabulature page. In those days, you had to learn how to read music, or you couldn't play this stuff. These Beethoven and Mozart went to school. They learned how to transcribe music onto paper. And actually, if you've ever seen a classical musician playing, it's not like a guy trying to crank out a song in a rock band and he's playing the guitar chords in his room trying to come up with a song. They didn't do that. They would sit down with the paper in front of them and start writing music. They hear it in their heads. They know what note they're playing and what it's going to sound like, so they write it down. And these guys could write fast. They know exactly the notes that are going to play. Maybe they have to go rehearse, obviously, and things change later on. And they're writing. You have a 100-piece orchestra, folks. You've got a string section with 30 strings. You've got timpani in the back, 5 or 6 timpani. That means drums of all sorts. You've got woodwinds over here. You've got all sorts of instruments, and you're writing music for each of them. You're not just writing instruments for the piano. A lot of them composed, and mostly they did compose on the piano. That was their. That's how they would practice their compositions, Mozart and Beethoven, and then they would write the stuff down, and they'd write the orchestrations down for bassoon, folks, or for flute, not just for piano or violin, which were kind of the main focal instruments in those big orchestras. Symphony, I should say, which is a better term, more sophisticated, more cultural. And then it all come together, and they're all playing their parts together, folks. And it wasn't just a cacophony of noise. It made sense. That's how good these guys were. It actually made sense. An emotional sense, something that was so not just pleasing to listen to, but challenging to listen to. Because if it's just easy listening music, you've heard that term, then it's kind of not challenging you. These guys up the ante on using atonal sounds, dissonant sounds, notes that wouldn't kind of go together normally. They made them happen because they heard something no one else heard. And it made sense if you put it together properly. It was that revolution. It was a revolution, and it was on. They led interesting lives. Learn about their lives in these two documentaries. Like I said, this week I'm not going to sign a paper because I'm just finishing up the Dutch painters. Hopefully I'll be finished with those this weekend. Please keep digging deeper on the essays. I think a lot of you are finally, after the third essay, maybe you'll understand what I'm going for, which is not a thumbnail sketch of a biography of, say, Mozart's life. I'm not really interested in when he was born or when he died. I mean, that's fine, but you can get all the info on Wikipedia. I want you guys to watch these documentaries and maybe listen to some of their music and try to understand what you're listening to and why it changed things. Because it did. And if you don't like classical music, hopefully you might change your mind on that when you listen to it. If you've never had an opportunity to see classical music played live, I think you'll have a different opinion. Because when you see it played live, it's monumental. What an achievement. Some of our humankind's best achievements. And there was many wonderful composers. We can't go to them all in the classical. Schubert and Brahms. You've heard of these people, maybe. You've heard their music, whether you think you've heard them or not. You've heard them, or snippets of it. And well, we're going to focus on these two big ones. They're kind of the obvious ones, but you kind of need to start with obvious. I'm always surprised. I shouldn't be now, but like for the Dutch painters, I get many papers that it starts off by saying, I've never heard of this painter. Not many of you have ever heard of Vermeer, I'm sure of it, but the other painter I signed, Rembrandt, is so famous that it's hard for me to believe that somewhere along the line in your education or on a movie or article you read or a class you took, they never heard of that artist. But some of you haven't. That's fine. That's great. Now you have. And I hope you explore it and go deeper on who these people were and why they made a difference and why we're still looking at their work hundreds of years after they've passed on. That's in the world they lived in, no social media. They got their word of mouth. Think about that. People from the old world, which is Europe, brought them news of these painters and these musicians to the new world through the stories they told and the sheet music they brought over. And all of a sudden, America starts flourishing with art from Europe because we're hearing the stories from that area. So check the documentaries out. I'll post them on Canvas. Take your time with them. I'll probably sign a paper next week. Keep discussing if you haven't participated. I saw some discussion, so some of you are participating. I thank you. Hopefully you're getting something out of this class, enjoying it. Hopefully you're staying safe. Was a little cooler today, but it's supposed to go up to 105 on Sunday, so we're not out of the warmth yet. The sky was almost, you can see blue sky today, not quite. We've been breathing smoke for a long time. I have a brother who lives in Oregon. He says it finally rained, and the rain literally cleared the sky up. in an hour. So that's what we need here is a couple of good days of rain. Not prediction. There's no rain predicted, so don't get your hopes up. Anyway, I hope you guys are getting out there and enjoying what we have of this weird life we're living through the pandemic. Um, I go to this coffee shop every day. Every day I go to the same one. Well, it was closed today. It was closed because two of the employees were tested positive. Now they're going to quarantine the coffee shop for 14 days. That means I got to go to another coffee shop. Bummer, man. Um, so it's out there. It's a real deal. It's happening. Don't let it happen to you or a loved one. On that note, I'll see you next week. Enjoy your weekend. Watch these documentaries. Take note. Keep the conversation going. And listen to some music. Rock on.